to record. So we now know that. We've broken into a 3-part series now, folks, just because there's so much information, and I hope it's good information for you. We're doing part 1 of 3. We're going to talk about the state of the sport and some statistics, and we're also going to take the opportunity to look at some accidents from in the past. It's going to be close to 90 minutes tonight. Actually, we may not even get through all of it in that 90 minutes, but because we're doing it, because we are doing it in a different format with 3 different opportunities, is we can move some of the items back a little bit further. So my disclaimer here, what we are trying to do is provide you with material to discuss. This we have oriented towards the flight instructors out there in order to give an opportunity to discuss about the accidents that have been occurring, learn a little bit more about what's going on. Not here to speculate, we're just trying to provide additional information. And in my position with the FAA as a fast team program manager and an active participant in the sport, I have the opportunity to probably see a little bit more information. Pretty much everything you're going to see here tonight is out there and available publicly. There may be a couple things that are not, and that's the same for all of the webinars, but there are things that I, as a fast team program manager, am able to share. There are other things, that we just can't share or we don't even know yet. So as I was mentioning, why are we trying to do this? To help us all learn, understand that we are all capable of having an accident. Just because, we do it so often or so little, or have this background or that background, we've found that that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not capable of making an error, a human error. We all make mistakes. Like I said, to provide some insights for teaching, recurrent training, which is important, and to remind us what is important to be focusing on in our flying. So I did ask, this is give you a little bit of information, and the last I looked, we're passing like 270 of you on here tonight. But I had asked a little bit about where we fly, just so that people know. And in this, what we got is we got people here that are planning on joining us from Germany, Peru, and Canada, even glider pilot or 2 from Puerto Rico. Out of all 50 states, we only had 3 of them that were missing: Delaware, Mississippi, and Oklahoma. Even here in Rhode Island, we have that tiny little state of Rhode Island, and somebody said that was where they primarily flew gliders too. I know there's clubs in Oklahoma. I'm 99% sure there's at least one in Mississippi also, if I recall. I don't know about any soaring clubs in Delaware, but I wouldn't be surprised. I know there is some glider flying, or a fair amount of glider flying down in that area. State that had the largest number was California. Massachusetts was second. This was a surprise to me. I expected maybe 50 or 60 different clubs, but we had about 119. 150 people out of that 550 said didn't fill out or say any clubs, but we had 119 different clubs. So that is absolutely terrific. The largest single club that I saw going through it was Greater Boston Soaring Club here in the Massachusetts area. However, I know there's a cluster of clubs in the Chicago area, and there were at least 28 members from a few of those clubs together all signed up. I also do know there's one club and at least one CAP wing that had contacted me and said, hey, we're doing this in a group setting. How do we do that to get the wings credit? Had set them up. In the handouts, you'll find there's this sign-up sheet or sign-in sheet if you are doing this in a group setting that you can send to me so that everybody does get wings credit if you so desire. Last year, we had this as a poll question, and I bring it up because what I would like to see, and I suspect all of us, is to see this switch around. We had asked how many people in attendance and we had about 275 answer. We're passing 275 in attendance for tonight now. And about 2/3 said that they did know somebody that had been involved in a glider or tow plane accident. And part of what we're doing tonight is hopefully working to start moving that the other way around. The more we get new people into the sport and operate safely, and they operate safely, the fewer accidents we have, and the less likely it is that they know anybody. Now, one big thing I got to put emphasis here, and I'm going to start at the bottom, is what I'm doing here tonight is to try to give you a little bit of extra insight that maybe somebody involved in your sport, enjoys it tremendously, can add just because of the type of thing that they do within the FAA as a fast team program manager. So I look at this as being supplemental to what the Soaring Safety Foundation does. Every year they do a terrific executive summary and have been doing it for years, usually published in the April issue, and the annual report, I suspect, to be posted soon. It's usually right around this time of year also. So what we're talking about here is kind of looked at it as supplemental and maybe some fine details to a broader picture that the Soaring Safety Foundation is terrific at giving information on. Also, I want to emphasize is the Soaring Safety Foundation and the Soaring Society of America have put out requests year after year and continue to do so, asking clubs to participate in the launch and flight time database. And that is essential information for them. I'm going to share with you a lot of numbers from the FAA here tonight. Some people, may agree or not agree with them, but the best thing we all can do to get accurate information is participate in that launch and flight time database. Each president of the club should get a letter. I know it goes out through the regional directors also. But if your club doesn't, strongly do consider participating in that. A few items terminology we'll be using tonight. Accident. The FAA and the NTSB have almost identical definitions of that. It may change in how they assess it, given the circumstances, but that's what we're going to put a lot of focus on is accidents. The NTSB also has another category called serious incident. And if you look at NTSB Part 830, that's where they talk about you must report an accident or any of the following serious incidents that involve damage to property on the ground, multiple glass displays, aircraft believed to be lost, incapacitation of a flight crew member, all of those different things. Incident, we'll talk about those. That is primarily an FAA term. The NTSB usually only cares about something if it's a serious incident or accident. The FAA, we care about everything, just don't use that terminology, serious incident. And also occurrences. And typically, what an incident is an event that deals directly and has an impact on the safety of flight. An occurrence may have an impact on the safety of flight. And in the FAA, we use a term event if we don't know what to call it yet. Usually the difference between an incident and an occurrence, usually, but not always, is aircraft damage. If there's some aircraft damage, but it doesn't qualify as an accident, we'll call it an incident. If it doesn't have any aircraft damage, we'll call it an occurrence. So a safe outlanding that the local police are called at and the FAA, ends up calling you about 99% of the time, that ends up being an occurrence, not an incident, unless you did damage the aircraft. Where does the info come from? Most of what you're going to see and hear in this series of seminars or webinars is from the NTSB, their reporting system, their actual reports in their docket management system. Also, we in the FAA have a ton of FAA data systems that we end up taking a look at, whether they're directly ours or related to what we do, such as NASA runs the Aviation Safety Reporting System. We look at some ICAO stuff also. So let's get into some numbers here. Hopefully this will give you a good overview. What I, for lack of a better way to call it, I'm just saying the state of the sport activity-wise. And the first thing is, this comes from an annual survey that's done for the FAA by a contractor. But what is the number of hours flown? It comes from the FAA General Aviation and Part 135 survey. And we only have the data right now. The 2021 survey just went out a month or two ago asking for the information. So we have data up through 2020. And you'll see that we had a significant drop in the number of hours flown in 2020. And that's not a surprise, is with coronavirus hitting, some clubs delayed getting started, some clubs had reduced operations, and even a few clubs out there didn't even operate at all. So we saw a pretty large drop. The biggest drops we saw were in the recreational flying type of aircraft, glider, the light sport, balloons, things that are typically done exclusively for recreational flying. Here is registered and active gliders according to the database, or the survey on this. Is the actual registered is a direct number from the registry. You can take a look at the survey to find out the information of exactly how that is determined. And then the active is based upon the survey itself. And that stayed pretty steady in the past year. However, you will see we've had a slow decline over the years to it. With the reduced number of flight hours total and dealing with coronavirus, we did see a pretty significant drop in the average hours flown per aircraft in the glider fleet, according to the survey. Again, like I said, really where we saw the hit on the decrease in the number of hours for 2020 was on the recreational and summer-like aircraft, you know, balloons, gliders, light sport type of things. And just for a cross note is EASA does a similar survey. However, they actually will readily admit they don't have information that is as good as ours. And back in 2019, they estimated an average glider flew 66 hours in their fleet. A little bit more than what you may see here in the US, but many of us could determine reasons why. Glider knowledge tests, no change if you joined us last year from what you've seen, but this just gives you an idea of the number of tests that are going on. The private pilot or private glider, thank you, is the one that has the most number of tests. The second is the additional flight instructor rating glider, which is in the green. And then for the commercial and the flight instructor glider, they are nearly the same number each year. Unable to update those so far yet this year, is it has not been posted under the data and research on FAA.gov. That's where you'll find this information for 2021. I reached out to the branch. The person that normally does it moved to another branch, so they are a little bit late in getting it out, but it will be showing up there soon. I had asked if they could just share those direct numbers with me, but I hadn't gotten an answer back at this point in time. In the survey, it also shows us the year that the active aircraft were built. And this I just found a little bit interesting, so I'm sharing it this year. And what I'm bringing it up is what I'm seeing at a lot of the clubs when I do see them. We will find we're pretty lucky that we still have people that are buying brand new gliders. It's a small fleet of very few aircraft, so just a couple of gliders being added to it every year. So a lot of the gliders you'll find are younger in comparison. You know, the average age of a glider is what you would consider a lot of the GA fleet, you know, 1970s or later, since it was built. But what is a little bit of a challenge, I think, for a lot of clubs out there is most of our tow planes were built, you know, prior to that peak in the 1970s. I think we're seeing a lot of those are a little bit older. So let's talk just a little bit in kind of broad spectrum numbers about the accidents that we saw in fiscal year 2021. Some of what I'm covering here is fiscal year for the FAA that covers fiscal year 2021 went from October 1st, 2020 to the end of September 2021. The calendar year is the classic January 1st to the beginning of December. In fiscal year 2021, we had 21 glider accidents, basically, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We had one tow plane accident, and I have 2 and 3 labeled there also. So, you know, you say we had 21 glider, 22 total accidents, and depending upon numbers from the FAA and the NTSB, you might look at it as high as 24. The reason why is one accident that they have labeled at the NTSB as glider tow was a tow aircraft, but for hang gliders. The second one is actually associated with glider tow pilot training. And I think it is an important accident to take a look at, even though it was not involved in towing a glider at the time or even towing a hang glider. But I think it is something that when we get to it in the third part of this series is an interesting accident to take a look at. And it actually happened right here in my personal home state of New Hampshire and in John Wood's district. Some people might find this interesting. I put this out here. I had come across this in some of the research that I do. And what the average cost is of an NTSB investigation of $32,000 a year. Now, we know in reality, more than likely, you know, since that's spread across all the accidents, that the glider accidents are at the very, very low end of this spectrum. Rarely is anywhere near that amount of money or more than spent on a glider accident. However, in a classic sense, the NTSB and the Federal Aviation Administration are both political entities, part of the government. So some things will get more attention than others. Accidents that involve a collision of 2 aircraft, accidents that involve commercial operations, such as we've seen in gliders in Idaho and Vermont in the past couple of years, and others that may be of political importance because of the individuals involved. All of those are ones that may lead to greater FAA or more so greater NTSB involvement and correspondingly additional cost associated with it. And I do bring that up because if you're not familiar, I think it was back in January or February. Actually, it was back a while ago now, even more than that, that the NTSB had done a special meeting on sport, commercial aviation, and things associated with it. And a couple of the accidents that they did use for the lack of oversight in pressing the FAA was for commercial glider operations, and they used the Vermont and Idaho accidents in that discussion. So what's the trend over the past few years? Well, if you look directly at the NTSB database, this is what it looks like, which is terrific, is reducing total number of accidents. However, we do have to take a look at a couple different things here. In fiscal year 2020, the NTSB still has an accident outstanding that is labeled as an airplane accident that was actually a motor glider, is how the aircraft is certificated. They had two of them. I had advised them. One of them they changed. The other one is still in preliminary, so they haven't issued the final report on that yet. So, you know, we actually did have 21 accidents versus 20 for gliders. And this kind of the same thing here in 2021. We have a matching number. And the reason there is we did have a collision. In the past, the NTSB would have two separate reports, but under the same number for a collision accident, one for each aircraft. In this case, with some changes in their system, they've taken those two and put them together. That's a collision between two gliders that happened in November of 2020. So we end up in this circumstance of 21 accidents in fiscal year 2020 and 21 accidents in fiscal year 2021. Now note, this does not include the tow plane accidents with it. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about some other things that may pique your interest with what the total number of these accidents are. If we look based upon the FAA GA survey, is take a look at the number of accidents per year, and this is across calendar year, is we can go back to 2020 for gliders. I have airplanes here for comparison, but we find that we have a pretty high rate, probably in the 30 to 35 range general on average. We have large spikes up and down, you know, depending upon various things. But if you compare it to airplanes, and this is a hard part for a lot of us to take in, is we do have what appears to be an accident rate that is about 4 times, maybe 5 times higher than non-commercial fixed wing airplanes. And we have a fatal rate that is about the same as the total number of accidents for non-commercial fixed wing, and about 4 times higher than the fatal rate of non-commercial fixed wing aircraft. If you joined us last year, you might see a couple of these years moved around a little bit. That's just because I cleaned up a little bit of the data to assure that everything was calendar year to calendar year. Also, there were 1 or 2 foreign accidents that were crept into that data that I've pulled out. Yeah. So this is something I think that we need to recognize and deal with. And this is what, for lack of a better way to put it, I'll call it the bad. And we have the bad, we have the good, and we have some ugly also. I talked a little bit there about the bad. Let me talk a little bit about the good. Is all of us probably do know what we do is risky. There is added risk, there's more hazards associated with it. But we are lucky in the soaring sport that it's the pilot that is the factor in most of the accidents. If we can do better as the pilots in making our decisions, not taking the risks that lead to, you know, scraped up airframes, bruised up bodies, or whatever, we can make big differences. And, you know, this is where I got to hand it to others that are out there and appreciate what they do in looking at this stuff too. You know, you've seen many write about it. Soaring Magazine, Chess in the Air, Soaring Economist, Wings and Wheels, all of them. They have some terrific information out there, but the best thing that I think you hear from them, and I think is a positive, is we are the ones as the pilots in soaring that have the ability to make that change, and that's what we have to do. The ugly I'll talk about a little bit later, but also this I just added in this morning is, and it is in the handouts, I think Dan or Rob or Eric, we're going to put a link in there where you can download some handouts from a Google Drive, since it's a little bit different here with the Zoom webinars. But the British Gliding Association put out their accident review for 2021. I don't, Dan or somebody, were you going to jump in and say something?
Yeah, that link was posted, Steve.
Excellent. Terrific. So that's in there, which is great. And here is just their kind of overview. One thing to recognize with this is their substantial damage report, which may not always be an accident in the eyes of the FAA. You know, a good example of it is the ground stuff. You know, 18 out of the 37 reports are ground, like, you know, you crack up a glider towing it. You know, here, as I see, you know, vehicles driving over wings. You know, if that aircraft hasn't started in flight, we would never classify that as an accident. That would show up as an incident or an occurrence. And so in Great Britain, it appears they have things that are required to be reported that here in the United States are not. You know, we do not require, under most circumstances, for glider type operations under Part 91, that incidents or occurrences are reported. Most of those we find out from either from an ATC facility or, you know, local rescue police departments or whatever calling it in, things like that. It's the accidents and for the NTSB, the serious incidents that we are mostly concerned about. Also, EASA, as I mentioned, does some research on the numbers. They share numbers that are based upon the number of flights, their accident rate and non-accident rate versus the number of hours. As I mentioned earlier, in their research for 2019, they said the average number of hours on each glider was 66 hours. But the EASA survey doesn't get anywhere near the response that the FAA gets. I think there's only 239 gliders responded to them, where we have nearly 500 in the FAA. Also, if you are curious, I know Gamma has done it in the past and they may do it again. They do a webinar where they compare and contrast the EASA numbers and the FAA numbers. Mostly airplane and helicopter oriented, but it gives you some terrific insight on how things are out there. So if we take a look at that, break that down, because in the GA survey, we also do take a look at the number of landings. And this is for 2019, is the average number of landings per hour. You know, single engine piston, 1, 2, 3 seat, and even the 4 seats do quite a bit. In general, a lot of those aircraft are either used for proficiency fun flying with pilots and don't have exceptionally long legs as compared to what you may see on some glider flights. You know, I'm talking to Ron Schwartz and those that go up and down the ridges, Carl, you know, and do the 10, 12-hour long flights. You know, gliders tend to do fewer landings per hour than airplanes. Now, granted, our training aircraft may do close to the same number, but on average, that's not the case. And like I had mentioned before, is sharing the data with The Soaring Society of American Soaring Safety Foundation is terrific. I have access to the data at my local club, and here's the average number of hours per flight, i.e. per landing in a glider, in our club gliders, and I throw my glider in there that's personally flown just to show an average. The only thing that we have that really operates at fewer than 2 landings per hour is our 233 basic trainer. But even then, you know, its average flight is still about 0.3 hours per flight. So that's why we end up seeing it. And if you compare and contrast then the accident rate based upon 100,000 landings, not 100,000 hours, is you'll see that like before, we end up in that circumstances that, yeah, we're probably about 4 times or so worse accident rate than non-commercial piston airplanes out there. And, you know, we got a lot of FPMs out there. It's something I enjoy soaring. I think it's absolutely terrific. But when you look at what we, the FAA, emphasize safety-wise, it tends to be all airplane oriented. And that's part of the reason why I try to do the outreach here, is to share some of that knowledge with the soaring community. I think Eric, John, Dan, all of you, most of what we do probably tends to be airplane oriented, is it not?
Yeah, Steve, it's John. Yeah, absolutely airplane oriented. You know, we'll have, it's seasonal. I mean, we'll have the seaplanes and powered parachutes, the gliders a bit during the warmer weather months, but most of everything we do is definitely airplane oriented.
Yeah, and I would just second that, Stephen. And I know, you know, we've talked about this. I mean, I was really surprised to see the glider accident rate once you started tearing into the data. It was a little bit surprising to me, and I know we had some folks that actually just commented saying the same thing.
Yeah, it was a big surprise to me the first time I did it too, and I wish I could remember his name. I'd like to give him the credit out in the Boulder area that, you know, did the program on how dangerous is soaring in compared to other activities. You know, I know that was a really good piece that he had written and has done some webinars on it. And I would encourage anybody, you know, like I said, that's the bad. The good part is we as pilots in the soaring community have the capability to change it. It really is much more pilot oriented than other parts of flying. And I don't know, I'm going to reach out to Daryl here, who's here to help us as a DPE perspective. Is this a surprise to you, Daryl? I know you do more than just airplane and gliders too.
Yeah, I can see that the airplanes are having, most of the investigations are going to be for airplanes. I also do hot air balloon as well. I think our accident rate's pretty much under control. Dan, you could check me on that one if you need to.
Yeah, the NTSB has caught a lot of attention with the balloon community, though.
Well, yeah, especially the commercial type operators. But I mean, in the New England area, and I forget we're speaking to the whole country here and part of the world, Steve. I'm usually talking about my little corner of the earth here.
Yeah, we did have 2 balloon accidents here in New England this year. Not in the district you're in, Daryl, in John Wood's district. You know, and those will be at least one of them we know will be an interesting read when the final comes out. Now, after looking at all of this, you know, it also came down to, I wonder about how this looks like to our active glider population. And this data is available through another part, but if you go on FAA.gov under the data and research, you can find this information. And they have estimates. I say estimates because in the glider world, it's probably way overestimated on the number, I suspect. And the Soaring Safety Foundation folks probably can give a more accurate, or the Soaring Society of America can give a more accurate to it. They believe that there's about almost 26,000 active glider pilots out there. You know, I don't think that's as accurate because they can really get down on the airplane and helicopter world based upon medical certificates that are current. But in the glider and balloon world, they cannot necessarily do that. So this is what the FAA estimates for the active number. You know, they think there's 14,300 plus private pilots out there that are active with gliders. 11,000 of those are ones that just hold glider only, don't have airplane or anything else. Same with commercial, and then the ATP. You know, you don't have ATP at the glider level with it. So if we take the number of accidents that occurred in calendar year 2021 and divide it up by the total number of pilots, we basically end up with 1 out of every 1,200 plus glider pilots ends up involved in an accident each year. And for fatal accidents, it's about 1 in 13,000. We only had 2 fatal accidents this year out of the 21 total, which is good, thankfully. Very few. You know, bent and bruised is better than completely broken. If you're curious, this is across the fiscal year, so it really starts in October and runs through to September. This is what we have kind of for the accidents, but there's a little variation or two with this also. The first one is that month of November. In November 2020, we had the collision between an ASW 20 and an ASW 27. Also in June is when we had a tow plane accident, which is a very interesting one, maintenance related. I'll give kudos to the pilot already on that one. I think from what I've seen, heard, pictures, did a terrific job. And then we had 2 tow accidents in July also. When we look at the data, the NTSB says this is where we ended up having the phase of flight that the accidents occurred in. Landing is by far the most, an approach and landing. Multiples accidents of people ending up short of the runway. I think this is something the Soaring Safety Foundation has also come up with, but it's usually short of the runway versus long on the runway. I'm kind of curious, Daryl, in your testing, if people are challenged, is it usually long or short? Is it a 50-50 split?
Oh, you mean on landing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
don't
say
know.
overall, glider pilots are better at the landing than the airplane pilots sometimes.
Excellent.
But I would say long rather than short.
Yeah.
For the guys. Yeah.
In the beginning part?
What do you mean by the beginning part?
Oh, like for new glider pilots.
Oh, you mean like private pilot certificates? Yeah, definitely. There'll be the ones that'll be on going long beyond the standards, basically.
Yeah.
Hardly anybody comes up short with the glider world that I've found so far anyway.
Yeah. And I'm asking that because we do have a fair amount that end up short, and it's usually higher performance gliders and off airport type landings. That's where in the accident statistics, it's rarely like the brand new glider pilot, it seems. It's usually somebody stepping up and also somebody that's faced with landing out at an airport. We had already seen this, but this is just a little bit greater breakdown, just looking at fiscal year 2021 already. Here's the chart that a lot of people find interesting, is where did the accidents occur? And this is for fiscal year 2021. is Massachusetts, where the Boston FSDO is and is shared with Dan. And poor Dan, we had the greatest number of glider accidents in Massachusetts in fiscal year 2021 for the entire country. It all was with one club that had some specific challenges. They had 3 accidents, what ended up being 3 accidents. The last one was a surprise to everyone. There was one of those where the flight instructor ended up having a cracked vertebrae or broken back. And we had a couple accidents like that this past year with it. And it takes place just outside of the Boston district. So they all fell into Dan Carter's district in Massachusetts last year. We've seen this move around. We've seen California in the past. We've seen Vermont in the past. Nevada, Utah, Florida. There. I always take a look at this each year, and in the past it has given a little bit more insight than I think it does this past year. What it does show, which we all know, and this should be something for us to be thinking about, is the age of glider pilots. We all tend to have a little bit more gray hair than pilots in general. And it really should show us that if we want the sport to thrive, we should be looking at getting younger folks involved in it. And I think it is a great way. Comparatively, it's usually less expensive than airplane flying. Most people don't realize that. But really didn't glean much when you compared the pilot age versus the month since review. Usually we have a few that people are outside of the time frame that they do their flight review or whatever. However, the one thing I will note, or 2 things I will note, one is broad-based general, second is here. We did have quite a few accidents with people that were fairly new in their review, either got their rating within a few months and had an accident. I don't think that was onesie twosies this year in the glider world. Had a flight review, but had an accident soon after in relation to it, or were a student that had recently been signed off. If I'm able to determine how recently they had received a solo sign off, they are grouped in here also. So that ends up happening there. And Daryl, I don't know, as a DPE, is that anything you've noticed or had a concern with, or ever even been asked by the FAA about, hey, Joe Smith or Joe Pilot, who you did a check ride with a few months ago?
I mean, like flight review or?
Check ride or flight review.
Well, I have come across a few, and we turn these into learning opportunities. No harm's been done yet.
Yeah.
But people will come to me and they're ready for their exam, and you find out that they've been flying for a certain length of time and haven't had a 90-day solo sign off.
Oh, wow.
So that flight time is now invalid to qualify for the exam.
Oh, yeah.
So it gives us an opportunity to circle back. And Steve, I know you helped me on one of those cases a long time ago where we get with the flight instructor or the clubs, the management on the field, and say, you need to check these things out before these guys go flying around.
Yeah.
Have run into a few where flight reviews were, well, because of COVID, I didn't get a flight review, but I'm grandfathered in. And it was like, well, no, you're not. So,
yeah.
And I try and promote getting a flight review every year. We do our spring checkouts in the gliders. You pretty much have got, 80% or more of that flight review done. So why not just take it the extra step, put the wings program in there too, and get one every year.
And that was the second item that I wanted to hit on. So thank you.
Okay.
It really should be. I think that's one of the things we've found is those that do, it helps significantly. Another thing that I usually take a look at in our accidents is the age versus the time and type of the airframe. Again, not quite as noticeable this year as it has been in previous years. However, it does have a trend, is the less than 25 hours in type. The insurance companies do end up paying for gliders that are brand new to their pilots. Rarely is it a brand new glider, but it's a brand new to the pilot type glider. We had a couple of those that were on first flights. We'll look at even maybe another one here in a little bit. You know, it is something to definitely bring forward. Also, you know, people that are going off on cross country in the first couple hours. I would strongly encourage, if you get a glider that is new to you, fly it right in the local area some first, get familiar and comfortable with it. The high time ones that you see up there varied from a low of 170. Most were in the 200-hour time and type range. The high time one was 1,600 hours. Like I said, not as noticeable as it has been. When we do have an accident, usually, and especially in the glider world, is one of the things that happens is the NTSB can basically farm out an accident investigation to the FAA. And as a result, probably 99% of the time, the first one there dealing with the accident investigation is at least an FAA inspector. And many times, and especially is the case in glider accidents, will be the only one there that shows up on the scene to investigate the accident. And then even with coronavirus in fiscal year 2021, because we're still dealing with it, is we had many circumstances where they were desk investigations. The information, pictures were asked to be taken, interviews were done over the phone, that sort of thing. With that though, the FAA in their accident investigation, separate from the NTSB, but usually in support to it, on their form asked for what the investigator believed was the primary cause for the accident. And in gliders, you'll see by far it's pilot-induced error. You know, if we look at the accidents in fiscal year 2021, those that were listed with a primary causal factor, have them listed here: hit known object for one, improper maintenance, loss of control, but pilot-induced error by far. You may also see, it may not always add up, because we had one accident that was the two aircraft, as I've mentioned. Another one was not looked at by the FAA, or at least put into our data systems. So, you know, and there may be other reasons for that too. An FAA inspector, when they're doing that, can also list contributing factors to the accident. That can be anywhere from 0 to say 10 plus if they really wanted. Usually you'll only see 1 or 2 contributing factors to it, but it will vary depending upon the circumstances. And this is what the contributing factors were. You know, hitting a known object, you know, that's kind of like landing short or going off the edge of the runway. Stall spin doesn't mean stall and spin, stall or spin. We have a few of those that relate back to hard landing because they're stalled just short of the runway, right above the runway, stuff like that. Undershot the runway, hard landing. Again, you know, this is something I've heard it from the members of the Soaring Safety Foundation out there. You get into the higher performance gliders and with off airport landings and things like that, rarely do we see overshooting the runway on accidents. It's usually associated with undershooting the runway and maybe stalling short on final. Another thing that we, the FAA, look at that is different from the NTSB is when we look at an accident, we look to see if there's any contributing factor or relationship to what are known as the 9 areas of responsibility of the FAA. And here they are here listed out, FAR violation, medical qualification, security issues, airport certification, FAR change, whatever it may be. Again, go back to the pilot-induced error. You'll see airman competency is the big one. We did have some others. We had one that the FAA inspector in their determination felt medical qualification to be able to fly was put in question. Even though a medical is not required, there still is, FAR 6153 that's required, that you need to be able to act as pilot in command and healthy enough to do that. And I know on one accident that was brought up. Airman competency wise, usually, at least historically more so, has led to what's known as a 709 ride or a re-exam. That's under 49 US Code 40 Part 44709, where the FAA has the responsibility and the right to re-examine anything that it certifies. That could be airport, that could be airplanes, that can also be pilots. And when we deal with airman competency, many times that ends up being a factor to it. You take a look at this is in one of the cases for this past year on airman competency, it was actually for the mechanic that had done work/inspection on an aircraft, not for the pilot flying. So that can be a factor in the accidents also. Another thing, and this is a hard part, it does happen, is we tend to be a much older crowd of pilots, as we all know. And sometimes we have people that end up having an accident later in life where maybe they should have, stopped flying solo or stopped flying altogether, but end up having an accident and then are requested to do a 709 with the FAA. And it's determined that maybe they don't have the skill set to do that. And that's a hard thing because nobody wants that to happen. And it usually leaves a distaste in the person's attitude towards the FAA, where, the FAA is following what rules they have in ensuring the public safety and trying to do the re-exam. That sort of thing, if somebody isn't meeting the standards, it works much better if it's caught ahead of time and dealt with internally within a club with some instructors, with the extra training that may be needed. And, I think we all deal with this. Daryl, you were talking about it, the encouragement for, a review every year, a flight review, wings program or whatever. I think that's probably one of the things that'll help catch this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it keeps people engaged and keeping the flight instructors engaged as well too. And Steve, I didn't want to interrupt you. This is some good data, but and maybe you'll get to this, but I'm particularly interested in, are we going to have any data on training accidents where there's been a CFI giving instruction in the aircraft during an accident or incident?
In the charts here on the first session, I don't have that. We will take a look at specific accidents in session number 2. Had not thought of that. They tend to be fairly small, but we do have a few of them that end up occurring this past year. In the last part, I know you've done this for us, Daryl, before, probably multiple times. This is where it helps to have a safety rep in the club. And what is changing, which is good, I think we're seeing fewer requests for 709s now, but where the offices now have the capability to say, let's send them back and do remedial training with some instructors, with a safety rep, and have them assure that the person is capable and safe and competent versus requiring them to do a check ride in a stressful situation. You've probably done a few of those for us, have you not?
I've only done one, and
Oh.
it was just remedial training. And all I had to do is get with the applicant. And, I think it was Dan Carter. They put together a syllabus of things that they wanted to see this person get more training on. And it was just a matter of going through that syllabus and questioning them and making sure that the comprehension had taken place, basically.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for doing that, Daryl. And the pilot was happy. They didn't get violated, and FAA's happy. We got a safer pilot, so we'll call that a win-win for everybody.
It was.
And that's what it is, Dan. I know you've been very, very active in that, probably the most active FPM in the New England area. So that is absolutely wonderful. All right. So before I had talked about the bad and the good, I hate to say, believe it or not, I need to talk about the ugly a little bit. And this is something that does happen, and we know it happens throughout, but I think the ugly part to this is unreported accidents, things that appear to be clearly an accident, but never do get reported to the NTSB with it. And that's who it is required to be reported to. I use this as an example. Again, not 100% sure in all of this. There may be something I'm missing, but when I look through the data, there are things that come up that appear to be accidents that appear to never be reported. And I use this as one because it's actually, although it was not reported and not recent, also, I'll emphasize this, it has some positive spin to it because the pilot did share it on YouTube. And if you're familiar, there's an instructor from New Zealand that does some videos, and he does a review of why he believes this accident happened. But if you go into the NTSB data and the FAA data, there's no report of this accident ever occurring. And as you can see by the broken tail boom on it, there is enough damage right here in this picture that would qualify as an accident. And in fiscal year 2021, or in 2021, we've dealt with the same thing. The insurance companies do not report totaled gliders, do not report accidents or that sort of thing, but they do end up having information that is available out there in the public. And it appears that in 2021, we had 4 aircraft that were totaled due to in-flight events, i.e. they were being flown. 2 of them actually are 2 ASW-19s, 2 Ventus Cs out there. And the insurance company is not responsible for, and not that they would ever normally find a reason to report an accident because they're not the operator, but the owner operator is responsible for it. Usually the only time you'd ever find the NTSB, or excuse me, an insurance company contacting the NTSB or the FAA is probably more so if they determined after the accident that the aircraft they were insuring was being used for something criminal. So the 4 would appear to be accident. I say likely because it appears, 3 out of the 4 I've seen pictures of. One of the 3, the damage was enough to total it, but the pictures that I had seen didn't show the damage. And then 2 out of the 4, as an investigator, I would say, yeah, that's an accident. Here's what the reports are: is 1 struck a power line during the landing sequence of flight, ripped off the horizontal stabilizer, wing and fuselage damage due to the impact. Another one was a hard landing, apparently off airport, but close to the airport, and also appears to be at a contest. That's something that gives some concern. Another one was reported very low thermaling, basically trying to do a save and stalled the aircraft and started to recover when they hit terrain. And it ended up crushing the cockpit area. From what I understand, some minor injuries to the pilot in that one. Another one here is landed short of the glider port. Runway caught the wing trying to make it to the runway in a field of corn and cartwheeled. And here's an example picture. This is one of the gliders. Insurance photo out there, the damage looking underneath the nose, and it wraps all the way around the fuselage along with other damage to it. And in this particular case, because I know and I do appreciate, I contacted the safety officer of the club because I had found this out. This actually was the second accident of this pilot. You know, and this sort of thing is hard for everybody involved. You know, the impact of it. And it's a hard thing to discuss, and I don't know how, but us FPMs here in New England have kind of talked about it a little bit, not directly with gliders, but because we've seen it in other places. But what you need to realize, if that truly is the case, that we had as many as 4 accidents in gliders that were unreported, we have a circumstance where we're looking at the number of accidents being 10, maybe even as much as 20% more than what you've seen in the other certificates. Another thing is, you know, if you end up being the next owner of that aircraft, I know at least one of these has been bought by somebody that tends to repair gliders. And hopefully will, and I strongly suspect, because they have a very good reputation, they'll do a terrific job of repairing it, and it may actually end up flying again. But there's no record of it on the NTSB database, and who wants to buy a glider and maybe not know? And I've had people say to me in discussing this subject, well, you know, especially if so-and-so's, they would tell me, yeah, but what about the next person or the person after that? Most of us end up just being keepers of our airframes versus the true owners of our airframes. You know, in aviation, they move on and on and on. And it really is, I know, I've talked to multiple safety reps that have a long time in the glider community, been very active with it, and talked about the challenge that it is for those pilots in those clubs, you know, kind of dealing with what is some people will call that guy. You know, thankfully, 99.99% of pilots want to do the right thing, and that's great. But like I said, FPM wise, we've talked about this and we've seen it in other things outside of gliders. So we did a program here in New England called Dealing with the Rogue Pilot that you can find on the Boston Fast Team YouTube channel. That is specifically out there that you can end up dealing with it. And John, Dan, right, you're familiar, and we had a lot of discussions about this.
Yeah, we always say if you don't know who that guy is, you might be that person.
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to be that guy.
Every outfit has one.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at here is just, please, I participate in the sport with you. I want to see it flourish. Is in these circumstances, we can all work together so that we don't hurt the sport or the people in it, you know, and probably more so is not hurt the next generation of the sport by failing to be open about what is going on and what is out there. And, you know, like I said, I've talked to some senior type people, I guess, about this to get their opinions, thoughts. This has been a discussion going on for over a year now. in relation to this. It's not an FAA rule or issue for the most part. You know, it would be exceptionally rare for the FAA itself to ever find a reason or a way to get involved with it. You know, more so it would be that they are acting careless and recklessly, or, you know, are dealing with giving fraudulent, misleading statements with it. It really is an NTSB issue. And I know Dan and I were talking about this, and an NTSB investigator shared this with us. You know, it's rare, thankfully, and that is a great thing, exceptionally rare, but they occasionally end up dealing with people that are not always straightforward with them. And this is one of the things that they end up starting to attach to their letters from the legal department when they put it out there, and basically tell the people is, hey, you need to play nice here, or else it's going to be fines as great as $1,000 per day. And I know we had an accident in Alaska where someone was less than truthful, and it ended up turning into criminal charges, which ended up being even worse. You know, so I want to emphasize here is there's a positive and a negative reinforcement about this, but this is one of the things that we don't, not knowing is not the answer, because correct me if I'm wrong, Daryl, but I think every level of certificate that I've ever seen, one of the items to cover is NTSB reporting requirements and NTSB Part 830, and it's part of the aeronautical knowledge requirements in Part 61.
It is, yeah. Absolutely is.
So you end up asking questions about this all the time.
I do, and you know, they come up with a variety of answers, but they're mostly all correct. And the best one I like is, well, I hope I won't have an accident, but if I do, I'm going to go to the regs, and they know at least it's NTSB Part 830. So that's a win right there. They know where to go. And the really smart ones will say, I'll also get some other pilots or my instructor involved also, and make sure I'm doing it right. So I think they truly want to, if they have an accident, they want to do the right thing.
Yeah. And like I said, that's 99.9% of the pilots out there. We're very lucky, is we do have a terrific industry that does very well at regulating itself. You know, but you gotta think about it in terms of what impact it has on you. What impact would it have on your club having an accident? And in today's litigious society, you know, to think about that, if the accident isn't reported, you know, do you really want to be a part of that? And like I was mentioning, if it's wrecked and not in the NTSB data. And that just reminded me, I'll alert people to it, but because of some proprietary information in it, I don't end up doing it as a webinar. But I have an in-person seminar that I end up doing, because I did a check ride, a type rating check ride with the owner of the aircraft. And to give you the short little byline to this, he went through a very challenging 3 years to get his aircraft back in the air, because it was involved in an accident, and it was reported, believe it or not, on the NTSB, but was never looked at in the pre-purchase inspection. However, the repair was somebody took the wing off a different model of aircraft and put it on his aircraft. And he had been flying it for 2-3 years, almost 2,000 hours, with almost 10 gallons less total usable fuel in it than he thought, i.e. probably landed a few times with like 5 minutes worth of fuel when he thought he had like an hour and 5 minutes type of thing. A very, very interesting story. So if you're ever in the New England area and you happen to see that I'm doing that seminar live, I'd encourage you to sit in on it and see. And with that, you know, that stuff like that increases our insurance costs and everything else. And that's the other thing we have is the impact of the hull losses, not flying, but when we have other things happen. And we have to think about this is over the past 10 years, when you look at it, we've gone from about 3,000 airframes total registered gliders down to, about 3,700 or 2,700. We've lost about 10% of the fleet over the past 10 years. And you got to start wondering, are we starting to enter a phase of preservation of historical artifacts? And I say this jokingly, it goes back to my other slide, but the tow plane in a lot of clubs is starting to become the oldest member out there. And, what impact does it have on your insurance? I just got hit by one of my safety reps today about insurance because new questions have popped up on the annual insurance renewal form for him. And he said, hey, did you know this? And we talked a little bit, but just to give you an idea for me, myself, I'm probably the type of person I suspect based upon what I do for work that an insurance company would love to insure me is just keep throwing money at them and hopefully never have a claim. That's what they want. But even I myself, in the past 5 years, I've seen my insurance for my glider go up $250, about 29%. And that's because not all of these are directly insurance claims, but things happen. And, we got to do our best to protect ourselves, whether it be what is apparently maintenance, as, we had a circumstance of a fabric tear on launch on a 126. Gliders that get knocked around in trailers or have trailers or untied aircraft blown around to them. Storm events that end up going on. I don't think this one was this past year. I think it may have been 2 years ago. Even other events, this one could be expensive. I don't think it necessarily was, but we had a couple landings in lakes here in the US and outside in the past year. Believe it or not, many times that is not that bad in terms of damage to the aircraft. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, I think this one was like some others I've seen where they're able to just dry out the airframe, lube things up, and it pretty much was good to go. But, one poor location had 2 of their gliders in a storm decide to play tag. And, this is what it looks like after, which is just horrible. Little things that you think about, but broken canopies. I know we had incident wise, we lost a pooch with a club, another club here in New England lost 233. We've had that happen before. So all of those are things that you want to be thinking about, in terms of maintaining the airframes that we do have and not losing them, and helping each other out with things associated with insurance and stuff. And that brings me into some of the other events. I look at stuff in a lot of different things. We have an emergency operations network, which is usually ATC oriented, but I keep track of that. And I look at the glider reports there, 44, but take those out, we're down to 26. It is interesting to note within the FAA recently, we have changed how we list some things. It used to be able to find it by just searching glider, but now much more is put into the systems using the make and model. So believe it or not, it's harder to find. But in that system, it reports on the accidents and incidents, but we have other things like pilot deviations that occur, near midair collisions that are reported by ATC, stuff like that. Here's a few interesting notes from that. But pilot deviation where the tow aircraft and glider entered Class Delta airspace without contacting ATC. That's a team that ended up a little bit short of a goal there. Pilot reported gear up landing specifically due to airport or pilot error. Sometimes it's positive. It just is noting, and this is the occurrence type of thing. A 233 landing in an empty parking lot, no damage, but then reporting near midair collision, glider landing in a lake for unknown reasons. We look at some other data with it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, This is where we kind of keep track of accidents, but it's a little bit harder to find those again this year. Hopefully that will change. But that we do know of, we had Pipistrel sinus, ground loop, nosed over, had only been sold 25 days prior. ASH 31 MI landed gear up. Another Pipistrel sinus, engine out, landing in a field. PIC 20E motor glider, crosswind on landing, loss of control. Landing in the parking lot, showed up the duodiscus in the lake. That's a repeat from another system. Stem A landed gear up, the fabric tear on launch or tow. You know, what is important to note with these is all of those items there are close to being an accident. And we are lucky this year in fiscal year 2021 that we actually had very few motor glider accidents in 2021. But you look here at the incidents and see how many motor gliders are there. It highlights that maybe we weren't that far off, you know, from having more motor glider accidents. NASA keeps track of the aviation safety reporting system. Many of us call it the NASA form, but NASA keeps track of it and has since the 70s. I take a look at that every year too, and dealing with gliders is breaking it down. We ended up having 17 that dealt with pure gliders, taking out the paragliders and all of that. It is a great system. Take a look at the advisory circular. It can be a beneficial system. Also, filing these reports, if you end up doing something inadvertently, like penetrating airspace you should not have, like Class D, Class Charlie, whatever it may be. And I also do want to emphasize the Soaring Safety Foundation has a similar system that they have that they then turn around and use as triggers for training and discussion in their FERCs and other items. So that is available out there too. And I would encourage you to utilize that, because that provides a direct feedback loop right back into what your fellow glider pilots out there are learning. The challenge here and what the aviation safety reporting system shows us is one area that we do have a challenge with is near midair collisions. Usually, most of the time, this is airplanes versus gliders, occasionally helicopter or parachutists versus gliders. But those 17 reports, this is what they all were oriented towards, if you break them down on what those subjects were. Here's some of the comments from those. This was one for somebody that learned about closing a canopy on a Globe. Is after slipping, the front canopy suddenly opened and departed the aircraft. Thankfully landed it safely, which is terrific. But, you know, in the two-seat gliders, some Globes and stuff, we've had some bad history with that in the past in terms of accidents. You know, comment a few days later, I received a call from an FAA POI asking about a near miss that had been anonymously reported, probably from someone on the ground. This one, you know, as I look at stuff, I'm able to compare and contrast. I saw this somewhere else, so I was able to tie that. It's interesting as both pilots involved didn't think it was a near miss, but somebody on the ground thought it was and reported it. And I think the pilot did the right thing, was a little bit concerned that maybe something might happen to him, so was trying to use the protection that the aviation safety reporting system can provide them. So kudos to them for putting that in there. Failure of the pilot not flying to recognize and intervene sooner with closing the air brakes when the pilot flying failed to do so. This is one of those instructional flights, Daryl. I don't know if this was an accident or incident. Can't put it together, but that was an instructional one in the aviation safety reporting system. This is actually the airplane pilot writing this, but this one I was proud of. Was complaining about near miss near an airport, but then realized after the fact that they made some errors with it, and failed to manage radio, failed to ensure Unicom communications with the traffic, and ended up enrolling in a ground school and getting additional instruction. And as an FPM, that's near and dear to my heart. I'm happy to see that. Is we're all human, we all make mistakes, but what we want to do is work to improve and try to not make those mistakes in the future. And it sounds like this pilot did the right thing there. Falling skydiver appeared 11 o'clock out of the cloud deck. Glider pilot attempted to turn right, and after another 3 o'clock, then it appeared another half dozen coming out of the clouds. That's not a fun feeling. I've been there in an airplane before. It can be scary, and it's been many years, but I think Dan may not remember this. Daryl, you might. I think it was fatal for the parachutists, a collision between an airplane and a parachutist over Northampton 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think the parachutists did live. I think the people in the aircraft perished. I believe. You need to check me on that.
Yeah.
But we operate at a glider port where there are skydivers in the area, and we've got a good relationship with the skydiving community there, and they've got a good relationship with us. But the skydivers, before they jump out of the airplane, they're announcing on that Unicom frequency, the CTAF frequency, that they'll be jumping in 10 minutes. So you do have some time to get out of the area. So not knowing what happened on that one, Steve, I would say know the area you're flying through. If you were on a cross country and you're going near one of those airports or areas that's got the little parachute symbol on the chart, look for the frequency so you can at least monitor that. That's all I got to say on that one.
Yeah, you probably have more experience than I do associated with that, and that is some terrific information. This was a complaint, and I purposely put it in here, but someone saying the glider landing area not properly maintained by airport management, grass is overgrown. I bring this up because this is something I've received complaints about, but I've also been trying to work with airports divisions on and airport managers. Is there have been changes over the past few years of criteria associated with runway improvements and stuff. And basically, there's not the funding there to make it all perfectly smooth for gliders and all of that off on the edges of runways. That's something that is a local airport manager issue, local airport issue on whether they want to do that or not and fund that. This is for public airports, not necessarily private airports. And as a result, fewer and fewer are doing it. They'll get work done on the runway, and now there might be some gullies or whatever, not things sticking up, but some gullies off on the edge of the runway, in closer to the runway than you have had maybe in the past. And I know we've lost a few airports that have had glider operations with that. And I know a few glider clubs that operate at public airports that are a little bit concerned as future construction plans are getting developed. So I just kind of highlight that and point that out a little bit. So here we are at a point instructor wise, and how are we doing on time? We at 25 past? As I said, we may not get to all of it.
Yeah, it's 25.
It is, okay. So we're gonna jump quickly here. We've gone through the stats part of this. I'd like to do an update on the accidents with it. I'm gonna just touch base on accidents that we've had updates on in the past year that we'll do in one of the future events, either next Monday or 2 Monday nights from now. We're going to go over the fiscal year 2021 accidents definitely next week, but we're going to touch briefly upon this accident in Richfield, Utah. The final has been issued there. We're also going to touch on this accident in Groveland, Florida. because the final has been issued at that accident too. In fiscal year 2019, we'll touch base on this Moriarty accident and this Brandon, Mississippi accident. A lot of these have good information. Alvord Desert in Oregon, that's a 2019 also. Wardsboro in New York, the final is issued there. Wilkeson, Washington. This is an interesting accident in relation to landing out. Let's see. In fiscal year 2020, this AC4 accident in Front Royal, Virginia. Groveland, we're not going to touch on that one because the final's not out yet. I'm going to hit upon others. This one will be quickly covered in Midlothian, Texas. Same thing with Union, Illinois. And last for the updates is Hinckley, Illinois, and that will be a quick one. I'm just going to touch upon what appear to be the major issues with those, just for those that may not have the chance to join us. But passenger briefing bailout, student training, Daryl, as we're talking about, that's coming up definitely. Medical, that ends up coming up. Landing setup pattern, low finals. Premature termination of tow and departure, planning and execution, and outlandings, and along with hard landings. And you know, these are the type of things that really, as flight instructors, will want you taking notes on. So as we get to the wrap up here tonight, you know, safety is more than just not having an accident. It's an active process you have to be involved with, and also do your best and take out or take in outside resources to help you recognize how you're doing. And, you know, the Soaring Safety Foundation, I know, has club inspections that they will do. Bert Compton does a lot of those. You know, it's shared only with the principals in the club, like the board of directors. All I've ever heard him say is just things that he sees in a broad sense from multiple clubs. And that information is brought into the Soaring Safety Foundation. But it's a terrific way to get some insight to find out how safe you really are being. Because we do end up finding this, and, you know, it might take you a second to realize this, but, you know, sometimes we think we're doing the right thing and being safe, and we might be making it a little bit worse. And as I talk about these accidents, I do just want to emphasize it is on us to improve the accident rate in our sport. It's a wonderful thing. You know, and I think it's terrific with youth flying, but we got to think about this in terms of the impact that this accident rate might have on youth flying, insurance, clubs, their longevity, the fleet, the neighbors, and the support, the airports, and even getting people involved as they are competing with maybe other forms of recreation. It is a terrific way to get into flying. It is an inexpensive way to get into flying. You know, I enjoy it tremendously. I know a lot of other people do. All of you here tonight do. So I think it is important for all of us to be doing that. Do look out. Part 2, we're planning March 28th, as I said, pure glider accidents. Daryl's going to be joining us again there. So thank you, Daryl. We'll talk about the instructional accidents. And then part 3, we're going to review motor glider and tow accidents and the updates on those also. Do want to thank the SSA, and many clubs are doing webinars that they're opening up for wings credit and other things. So that is absolutely terrific. And here in New England, at the end of every month on the last Tuesday, we do the New England Fast Team webinar. We moved it to Monday night for next month, or for this month, next week. But also take a look at things like start of the season and review, and maybe take a look at the Boston Fast Team YouTube channel. There are some glider specific stuff there, and FAAsafety.gov. So now is that point in time. The season is starting for many of us. It's time for us to go out there, go fly. You know, the secret to being a better pilot is getting out there and flying with an instructor. So I do want to thank you, and hope that you will do that in the near future. So thank you, everyone.